Hello and good evening. My name is Robert Enlow, and I'm with the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice. Tonight, we're joined by Dr. Steve Perry, who is the principal of Capital Preparatory Magnet School and who regularly appears on MSNBC and CNN. Dr. Perry will be answering questions on school choice and what it means to parents, children, and you. If you have a question for Dr. Perry at any time during this call, please press 0. Again, if you have a question, please press 0. So, Dr. Perry, to start, I'd love to hear, and I think the people on the call would like to hear, what has made your school so successful?
First of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to people about how important school choice is and what opportunities it presents to each family. But what makes Capital Prep so successful is the basic presumption that each child has something meaningful to contribute, and that if we put together an individualized learning plan for each of these children, what we're able to do is to serve them based upon their needs and the high expectations that we set for every child. In addition to that, what makes us so successful is that we have the most talented teachers that we can find, who understand that it's their obligation to deliver world-class education every single day.
That's fantastic. Again, if you have questions for Dr. Perry, please press 0 on your keypad. You know, Dr. Perry, most kids go to schools that just don't work that way, right? That don't work the way that your school does, unless parents can either afford to move to another school district or pay for tuition at private schools. Can you tell the people here on the call what school choice is and why your families are picking your school?
School choice, very simply, is the opportunity to select the school that you think is, I don't want to say school, the educational experience that is best for your child. Because some parents may choose homeschooling, others may choose a private school, some may choose a parochial school. Still, others may choose a magnet school, a charter school, or a neighborhood school, or they may choose a vocational technical school. These are all academic experiences, an online school that they may say works best for their child and their family. What makes over 4,500 families choose our school every single year? We only able because we choose through lottery. But we're only able to choose about 100 a year. What makes them select our school is that they know that their child is going to college when they finish. They know that they're going to get a college preparatory academic experience in which the children feel loved. And those high expectations and love are what most families say that they want for their children.
That's fantastic. Again, if you have questions for Dr. Perry, please press 0 on your phone and please give us a question. You know, one question that we'd have and we've been getting in, you know, your school's been successful and the idea is successful, but there are a lot of people who don't think school choice is a good idea. Why do you think that is, and why are people opposed to the idea of school choice?
Well, there are two things. The reason why one group is opposed to school choice is because they just don't have the correct information. Some of them believe that if they participate in school choice, meaning if they pick their own school, that somehow the school that they're leaving will be worse off. So they feel bad for the children who they believe will be left behind. So that's a genuine feeling. And it's rooted in just bad information. The second reason, which is more of the reason why school choice is struggles to expand in some areas, is because the teachers' unions and organized labor have worked to force families into failed schools so as to ensure that their membership increases with each and every year, because the teachers who are in the union schools are forced to pay dues even when they don't want to. So when children leave those schools, or the fear of children leaving those schools, is a promise that those schools will diminish in size, and when those schools diminish in size, their membership will diminish in size and they will lose their political influence. The fact is that school choice is here to stay, and it will only grow. None of us can imagine a time where there will be less school choice options in the years to come. None of us can imagine a time in which there will be less charter schools, less out-of-district choice, less magnet programs, and the like.
So that's a great point, and we've got some questions coming in. Again, if you have questions for Dr. Perry, please press 0 at any time. You know, why do we have to have school choice? I mean, back a few years ago, we had a great system of schools that was working. Why do you think now is different from then?
Well, I actually disagree with that. I think that we've romanticized the former education system, or the current education system was designed in the early 1800s. We have always had a school system that is neglected to take care of the masses. There's always been a gap in the access to quality education between black and white. There's always been an access gap between rich and poor. And so there's always been an access gap. In addition to that, as long as there have been public schools, there have been private schools. As long as there have been private schools, there's been school choice. And as long as there's been the ability for one parent to move from one town to the other, or to send their child to live with another relative, there's always been public school choice. So there's always been school choice. The problem is that we didn't call it school choice, and we've colored nostalgia with these beautifully rosy glasses. But the facts are the facts. In 1954, the reason why Brown versus Board of Education became a reality is because it was very clear that certain populations were not receiving access to a quality education. So we need school choice because we've always used school choice.
Well, that's right. Again, one question we've got is that school choice sometimes seems to be a partisan issue. Do you think it really is about one party or the other party?
Sadly, it has become seen as one party's mantra, and because the GOP is leading the way on ed reform, it seems as if some of the traditional challenges that the GOP is hamstringed by its inability to be able to be as inclusive as it needs to be of people of color. It seems like those of us who are people of color and those of us who wish to fight for school choice are somehow siding with those people who seem not to have our best interests at heart. But the fact is that from George Bush on out, those individuals who are Republicans who have pushed the issue of school choice have in some ways been leading the charge to help people of color to get out of the worst schools in America. No one can deny that Latinos and African Americans and poor people are attending the worst schools in America, not because of poverty, but because of regionalism that says that if you live in a certain area, we're going to force you to go to failed schools. So because of the partisanship, and because of some of the traditional challenges that the GOP faces, and many of them are of their own doing, the school choice issue seems to be one of the Republicans wanting to keep their kids away from other communities. And that's sadly mistaken, because the fact is that every time I go to a black church or when I go to communities of all colors, I can do hip-hop radio interviews, or I can do conservative talk radio, and every time I'm on the air, I find that there's a groundswell of support for parents to have the right. I mean, this is absurd that we're even talking about this in 2014. Who thinks, honestly, that a parent shouldn't have the right to send their child to the best school for them? I mean, it's an impossible argument.
So another question, I totally agree with that, obviously. Again, if you have a question for Dr. Perry, please press 0 on your keypad at any time. One question that we've been getting a lot of is, are the schools really that bad? Are traditional public schools really that bad?
Yeah, they absolutely are. It depends on what you think that bad is. If you think it's good to be in the lowest quartile in performance in the world among industrialized nations, meaning the bottom performing nations, and spending in the top quartile, then you're cool with it, but I'm not. If you're comfortable with some school systems like New York City or Bridgeport, Connecticut, or pick your poison city, if you're comfortable with African Americans, 9 out of 10 reading, writing, and doing math below grade level, or a city like the city I work in, 80% of the children from Hartford, 80% reading, writing, and doing math at least 2 grade levels below. 2. So, yeah, they're that bad. Or here's where the real kicker is. Many white families and wealthy families think, well, but it's not that bad for us. You're wrong. Our country is still majority white. And if we just looked at the numbers, only 13% of 13 to 15% of Americans are African American, and 20 somewhere in that are people of Latinos. So, if the belief is that it's the people of color who are bringing the numbers down, the fact is that the majority of America's students are still are mostly white, and so our white kids are being beaten by countries who are poorer than us and browner than us. So yeah, they're doing pretty badly. They are.
So we got another question. And again, if you have questions for Dr. Perry, please press 0 at any time. We got a question that we get a lot, which is, isn't this really about parents? I mean, kids are coming to schools, with parents that are not involved and not helping their children the way that they should. I mean, is this really the parents' fault in some ways and not the school's fault?
No. It's not a parent's job to teach a child calculus. It's not the parent's job to teach them Spanish when they don't speak Spanish. There are things that parents can do to help to improve the child's likelihood of learning. Read to your child early, do math facts with your child early. But the presumption is that every single parent who's forced to send their child to a failed school isn't doing those things. They're doing what they have to do. They just can't get out of schools that they find themselves in. There are 4,200 children currently on Capital Prep's waiting list. That's one school. My school is 4,200 children today on the waiting list. Those parents are just as committed to their children's education as the kids whose parents whose children got into our school. So just because our kids are going to outperform the kids on the waiting list, it doesn't mean that the parents whose children are on the waiting list are bad parents. They're just sending their children to failed schools because they cannot afford to send their child to a better school. They cannot afford to move, and they keep losing the lottery.
Wow, that's tragic. It looks like we actually have a question online as well, so go ahead.
So Jeff from Alabama has a question. Jeff, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, my kids are actually grown and in college now, but they were homeschooled. And I'd like to know, what your intentions are to protect that right.
I think that
homeschooling, homeschool their kids.
I think homeschooling is one of the most vital parent choices that you can make. And one of the biggest problems that we have is we don't seem to respect homeschooling when the data is pretty clear. If a parent who doesn't have an education background can keep her or his child home, and they can outperform the children who are going to a school in which they have an entire staff full of people who have an education background, we need to take a look at what's going on in the homes and find out how they've been able to be so successful with those children. That's one. Two, I think that it is criminal to make a parent pay into the education system that they're not using and then not give them some sort of tax credit for keeping a parent home. Too many parents are forfeiting an income or two because they believe that their child is getting a substandard education. And in most cases, they are. So I think that we need to fight not just for the right that parents have to homeschool, but also that they be compensated by allowing them to receive some form of tax credit. I believe in vouchers. I believe that a child, that the amount of money that's allotted for the child to go to school is the parent's money. No different than a Pell Grant, no different than student financial aid, no different than the GI Bill, no different than any of these methods or Section 8 or food stamps. These are all voucher programs. I believe that if you decide to keep your child home, whatever the amount of money that was going to go to the neighborhood school should go to the home, or the recipient of the child as a student.
That's a fantastic question. As a follow-up question, Dr. Perry, again, if people have questions, please press 0 on your keypad at any time, and we'll take that question. How do we keep the government out of a family's education? So if they're homeschooler, how do we make sure that the traditional government doesn't get in the way of quality schools and doesn't over-regulate and overburden families?
Well, I don't know what is meant necessarily by the term the government, but I do think that it is important that we set standards. I think that we have to set standards as to what a school or what an academic experience is, whether it be a traditional school, a charter school, a public, a vocational technical school, or a home school. We need to set standards because it's important that we provide families with the guidance that's necessary for them to support their children, regardless of where their children are in school. One of the biggest problems that we face is that entire swatches of this country are receiving substandard education, while other states are receiving, relative to this country, pretty good education. That can't be the case. So when we have standards, what we can say is a child who is 11 years old should know and be able to do these things, regardless of who's teaching them.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Perry. One other question we get a lot, we've been getting on the phone call again. If you have press 0 on your phone at any time. What can people on this call do to help in their states promote the idea of school choice?
That is the honest God. Wow, I'm gonna shout it like I was in church. Virtually every form of school reform that you need can be achieved at your local school board level. So first of all, we have to encourage more like-minded for the local school board. Stop allowing these folks who the unions push in place or the Teachers Association push in place, who are only interested in maintaining the status quo so that they can ensure that their members keep jobs. Stop letting them be the ones who control your school boards. So, first, more parents need to run for the school board in their town or region. Second, you have to go to these meetings and push them to make sure. If you don't want to run, you have to push them. You can either push them physically meaning by actually going to the meetings, or you can push them electronically by making sure that you email and communicate your concerns.
Well, that's very helpful. It looks like we have another live question, so go ahead.
Yes, we have a question from Christine in Mississippi. Christine, go ahead with your question.
How do you teach the young generation now how to have and teach them common sense? They have the education and everything, but the common sense, they don't use it.
Well, that's one of the questions that a parent can answer. Too many of our parents are too interested in being children's friends. They want every child to receive a trophy just because they showed up to practice. Too many parents want the teachers or coaches who are in their children's lives to say things in a nice way, to be polite, and honestly are shielding them from the truth. In addition to that, too many parents are fighting to make sure that social supports that are necessary to teach children basic common sense, like when the kid next to you says you need to brush your teeth because your breath stinks, we've allowed those conversations that pass on certain mores and standards to become seen as poisonous as opposed to essential to raising a community. So we do on some level need to go back to what they would refer to as that old-time religion, which is making sure that the supports at home are there, that children are allowed to face the truth from members of authority, and that they're allowed to face the truth from their classmates so that they can find a way to develop the common sense that is not as common as we need it to be.
It's a great question, great answer. Thanks very much. Our time together is almost up. We have one final live question here, it looks like, so go ahead.
Melinda from Columbus, Mississippi, has a question. Go ahead with your question, Melinda.
Yes. My granddaughter has juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. She has always been an A-plus student. She went all the way through kindergarten, first, second, and third grade, and fourth grade. As soon as she reached junior high, once then, we had to start homeschooling her because if she misses more than 4 days of school, she will fail. No matter if she has an A-plus average, she would still fail. And she's had to have 8 different surgeries due to the arthritis. And how come the money that the school drew off of her, how come her mother and them cannot draw that money to help support, to pay for her homeschooling and the things that she needs to be homeschooled?
That's a great question. The first part of that, I think it's important to note that when a child has a documented physical illness, it's under what's called a 504 plan, which means that it's called other health impairments. We can't really get into too much right now, but the school district should accommodate her, and they shouldn't penalize her for being out if she has these issues. The second part is the real big issue. I believe that the money should go. The money should follow the child, and that should include home. So, therefore, the reason why it doesn't is because when parents decide to vote with their feet in what I refer to as micro-political activism, meaning something that's just an individual does it, then if, in my case, for instance, let's say our school that has 4,200 kids on the waiting list, if all 4,200 kids on our waiting, if I could accept them all because the money followed them, then the schools that they're leaving would be shut down. And if the schools that they're leaving are shut down, then the people who make the money off of those schools feel like they will, the unions and the teachers associations, they tend to feel like they're going to lose their membership, and if they lose their membership, then they're going to lose their political clout. So the reason, it's not about children, and it's not about what's good for children or education. It's about making sure that the teachers associations and the teachers unions stay in as much power as possible, regardless of the impact that it has on your particular granddaughter or our state or our country as a whole.
Now, Dr. Perry, there are some states like Mississippi and Iowa and I think even Alabama who are looking at something called education savings accounts, which would allow the dollars to follow the kids straight to the service provider, even if it's a homeschool. It's basically like a credit card where the money would be put on the card for a child's education, and the families could take it and use it at whatever provider would best serve their kids. So that's, I know, something coming up in the States. I think we have one more live question here, and then we're going to conclude. So go ahead with your question.
Twyla from Phoenix City, Alabama, has a question. Twyla, go ahead with your question.
Yes, I was just wondering about if you had any offers or subject matter on school bullying. My child gets a really good education at the public school that she attends, and but the big issue is school bullying, and no matter the counselors, no matter what, it's not being addressed. And I don't want my child to suffer from her education. As I was saying earlier to the speaker earlier, that she was taught algebra in 4th grade, whereas when I went to school it was 9th grade. So I believe they are excelling further than what we learned when I was in school, but it's being interrupted because of the bullying, and I know that's a big issue all around. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I can't speak specifically to your daughter's situation, but what I can say is this. There are laws in place that protect children from such behavior. Generally speaking, what has to happen in the school is that once it's reported, the school must investigate, and if they find that there is an instance of bullying, what they have to do is they have to find a way to educate both children as to what their rights are and how they can handle this best. If it continues, then the child who is doing the bullying, can either be expelled from school and or arrested. So there are in place mechanisms to address it. I also say, though, one of the biggest challenges that I face as a principal is the fact that so many people call so many things bullying that are not bullying. Sometimes kids just don't get along, and that's their right as children. And just because a child is rude or disrespectful doesn't necessarily mean they're being a bully. So it's also important that we do a good job or a better job of educating the families to let them know really what bullying is and isn't.
I appreciate that, and I agree with that. What I would like to say to that point is this. First of all, you can always go to the Friedman Foundation's website, edchoice.org, edchoice.org, and send us an email, and we'll be happy to send you some of those resources that you were talking about. The other point I would make about that is one of the powerful things about school choice, the most important thing, is it allows parents, even if they're getting a good education in the school that their child attends, to be able to vote with their feet if they have to, and be able to have the power, economic power, to go from one school to another school. So while that school is working, I will say to you the conversation between your principal and you related to the bullying will change if he knows that you can walk away with your money and go to another school. That's one of the most important, powerful things about the idea of school choice. Again, I want to thank Dr. Perry for being on the call today, and I'd like to thank all of you for being on the call today. Again, I want to make sure that you know we are the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice, and our website is edchoice, edchoice.org, edchoice.org. Thank you again very much for your time, and we appreciate it, and we hope you'll join us again in the future.